Welcome to the January 2022 update of our solar PV system here in northwest London in the UK. I've got lots of news to tell you, so let's get straight into it. First of all, the most exciting thing to let you know is our new Audi Q4 has finally showed up. So it's really nice and we've just started driving it, so I'll give you some more updates on that as we go along. The other bit of news is we decided not to proceed with PodPoint. I'll get into a few reasons why, but instead I've decided to get a Hypervolt EV charger. So we got that installed as well this month. Before we get into it, just the usual disclaimer, I am not an expert in any of the things I'm talking about. I'm just sharing my experiences and what I did for educational purposes. If you are considering getting any of the things that we talk about, then I would recommend you seek the relevant advice first from a qualified professional. Okay, so to talk a little bit about the Hypervolt. So this is a relatively new British company, and the reason I chose to go with the Hypervolt is because they look cool, they're compatible with a solar system, they have pen fault detection built in. So if you're in the UK, it's a requirement for an EV charger to have pen fault detection. Don't ask me what it is, it's just an electrical requirement thing. So this device has got it built in, and you don't need to have any additional external things added onto your property to make it compliant. Some of the other EV chargers on the market, for example the Tesla one, does not have this feature built in, and therefore you require an earth rod to have it installed in the UK. And although the earth rod is a small gadget, the enclosure that it has to go in is quite big, and then there's no place for it to go, or it's going to look ugly on our driveway. So as far as I was concerned, I want a device which is fit for purpose. Once I turn it on, it's got everything it needs in it and it can go. So that's why I went with the Hypervolt. Of course, it's got smart home integration, and you must have figured out by now, I like my gadgets, I like having apps for everything. So this is really good. It's got automatic load management, so if you're drawing too much current, then you're not going to blow your main fuse. It's also compatible with agile energy tariffs. So for example, if you're on Octopus Go or you're on Octopus Agile, the system can learn from Octopus about when they're going to be offering cheap electricity or paying you to take electricity, and therefore can choose to charge your car at those times. So it's quite smart. You just go in the app and tell it you want to do this, and it does the rest for you. Here in the UK, there's currently a grant available if you get an EV charger installed at home, so it's eligible for the grant. That grant does expire for everything apart from a flat or an apartment at the end of March 2022, by my understanding. So if you are thinking about getting an EV charger, this brand or whatever other brand, then you haven't got long if you want to capture the grant. And finally, just a kind of a bit of a gimmick, it has LED lights, which of course tell you the status of the charger, but it can also go into party mode, so you can have a light show on if you have your friends over, for example. So we got 2 of them installed, partly because we're expecting to get another car, but also just to capture the grant. If it turns out that 2 is excessive for us, then I can always relocate one to a different property, but at least I've captured the discount from the grant. So the green light means it's charging, the blue light means it's on standby, a red light would mean I've got some sort of fault, and then it can do all sorts of kind of disco party lighting. There's a few different presets that you can play around with in the app. And Hypervolt, keep on adding different ones for the different seasons, so the array of choices will continue to grow. The reasons why I didn't go for a PodPoint, there's only kind of 2 or 3 reasons. First of all, PodPoint was supposed to contact me to get it arranged prior to our Audi arriving, and we didn't hear from them in time. So that's one reason. I mean, I'd already decided that I didn't want the PodPoint, so I wasn't really motivated to follow up with them and kind of chase them up. The other reason is the PodPoint Solo charger, which they would have given us for free, in my view, doesn't look very nice. It's a bigger device than the Hypervolt. It's kind of grey and black, and it's only available in this one colour. And if you look at the front of our house, we have white cars, white flower pots, white windows, and so a white charger fits in quite nicely. The PodPoint would kind of stand out. But also for what it is, it hasn't kind of had any aesthetic developments in my view over the last few years, and PodPoint in the UK is one of the most expensive chargers you can buy. So I just didn't see what value for money I was getting by having a pod point. I kind of thought if they're charging customers that kind of premium for the device, you would expect it to be updated all the time, cutting edge, looking really cool, lots of features, etc. And my concern is that they weren't kind of progressing as fast as I would like to see. So I prefer to go with a smaller company, and so far everything with Hypervolt is good. They answer the phone straight away. If you have any issues or questions, they're very responsive, and that's the kind of customer service, etc., that I'm looking for in these kind of gadgets. So those are my key reasons. Nothing particularly against a pod point, but knowing that we were going to get 2 chargers, I didn't want to mix up the brands. I wanted 2 of the same, and I was only getting 1 pod point for free. I would have to pay for the second one, and like I said, the second one costs a premium, so I would rather just pay and have 2 Hypervolts, which were not that much cheaper, but a bit cheaper. So moving on, let's get into the detail. So January, first of all, starting on the top left, the graph here is from British Gas, who is my energy provider. For those of you outside of the UK, British Gas provide my electricity and my gas supply. They're a dual fuel supply, even though they're called British Gas. So in the month of January, according to them, we consumed 507 kilowatts of electricity. And I should say we purchased 507 kilowatts of electricity from the grid. There's 2 spikes that you see there in the data, and that is the 2 days that we charged our new electric car. And so on each day it pulled about 20 kilowatts down from the grid to charge the car. So that's why you see those 2 spikes sticking out dramatically. If I move over to talk about the graph on the right hand side, so overall January started off as a relatively cloudy month. We had the odd day here and there early on where we got a bit of sunshine and we were generating some power, but the majority of days, certainly in the first kind of 20 days of January, were relatively cloudy, and so we're generating a couple of kilowatts or something like that every day. But as we got towards the end of January, the sun seems to be just that little bit higher in the sky, and when it's shining, the sun is a lot brighter, and the power being generated is generating at a higher rate. So I'm starting to see in the short amount of time that we've had this system that we're kind of breaking our own kind of records of how much power is being produced in a day, what the maximum rate of power is at any kind of one moment, etc., etc. So let's talk about the numbers. So according to Enphase, so the graph on the top right is from my inverter system, which is Enphase. They say that I purchased 505.9 kilowatts from the grid. So you can see there's a discrepancy of 1 kilowatt versus what British Gas say. I think there's always going to be this noise. As I said in the previous video, the CT clamps are not completely perfect. But over the amount of power that we've drawn across the month, that is kind of so minute it's irrelevant. Overall, I'm going to use the number that British Gas have given because that's what they're going to charge me for. So in all my calculations, that's what I'll consider. But according to Enphase, it's 505.9 kilowatts. My solar array generated 154.7 kilowatts across the month, which gives a grand total of 655.9 kilowatts that my house consumed. I seem to have exported 4.6 kilowatts back to the grid. At the moment, I still don't have the relevant paperwork to apply for the smart export guarantee, which basically means I don't get paid for anything that I'm sending back to the grid. Now, I've covered it in a previous video. My system is set up to use and to store as much of the possible power that's being generated. Sending anything back to the grid is a last resort. But you can see that the 4.6 that we've sent back is made up of tiny fractions being sent back to the grid on every day. If you look, I'll explain the graph in a minute, but there's tiny amounts going back. But towards the end of January, you do see kind of some bigger chunks on the graph. I don't know why this is. The only reason I can think of is that when the sun shines and when we request power in the house, the rate at which we're requesting the power at that instant is greater than what the battery can charge or discharge at. So for a moment, it uses power from the grid or pushes power to the grid as a buffer until the battery is kind of ramped up at its rate of charge or discharge. So that's what I think it is. I'll keep on monitoring it. Today's the 5th of February, and I can already see that there's been a couple of days in February where we've been doing a similar thing. So if this continues and the numbers get a bit too big, I'll be speaking to Give Energy, my battery supplier, to see if there's something they can do to optimize the way the battery's working. Because although it's 4.6 kilowatts, every little bit counts. So looking at the graph, just to explain, as always, the blue bars on the graph represent solar power being generated by the array each day. The grey bars above the blue ones represent the difference that we had to draw from the grid, because for each day that's how much power our house was consuming. On the bottom of the graph, the orange bars are basically the sum of the blue and the grey. And if you look very carefully on some of the orange bars, you see a tiny grey sliver at the bottom of the bar, and that represents the tiny amount of energy we are exporting back to the grid on those days. So like I said, the beginning of January started off pretty rubbish, with hardly any power being generated each day. But we did have a few sunny days in there generating more power, kind of in some cases getting up to nearly half of what we consume in a day. Keep in mind it's still January, we're in England, and the sun is not very high in the sky, and the amount of daylight hours that we get is still quite low at the moment. You can see in the middle of January we had a few good sunny days there. Then we had a week where it was just cloudy and dark all the time. It was one of the days there we barely generated anything. And then as we get towards the end of January, you can see that the amount of power that we're creating is ramping up quite significantly. And we had a couple of days there where the solar array produced more than half, roughly 3/4 of the power that we consumed in that day. So my observation here is the tiny amount that the sun is now higher in the sky as we're getting at the end of January is making a dramatic difference in not only the amount of time the sun is shining on our solar panels, but also I think it's the angle the sun is shining on them. So it's penetrating more and generating a higher voltage, which means higher amounts of power. So this is good, and I would imagine by the end of February we're probably going to have a day where all of our power has been produced by the solar array. So I'm looking forward to giving you the update at the end of February. I would say, I think it was the 30th of January where we generated so much power during the day that we got to a point where not only was the solar array providing power to our house at that moment, it was also generating enough excess to fully charge our battery. So the battery we have is an 8.2 kilowatt Give Energy battery, and it got maxed out by about 11 or 12 o'clock, midday. And so I think that's why you see a little bit of power being exported to the grid, because the excess couldn't go in the battery, the excess wasn't needed to drive our house, and so there was no other option but to push it back to the grid, and the car was already fully charged. Looking at the graph at the bottom then, or the diagram at the bottom in the middle of the screen. So this is just a diagram of the layout of our solar panels on the roof. So the lighter kind of royal blue coloured panels are the ones on the front of the roof, and the very dark midnight blue black panels are the ones on the rear of our roof. So Enphase will change the colour of these panels as the day goes on to represent how much power they have generated. So the lighter the colour goes, the more power that panel is generating. So as I said before, the panels on my front roof face east, and so they catch the sun until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The panels on the back of the roof are shaded by a neighbour's dormer, and by the time the sun gets round far enough, it's basically setting. So they don't really generate much power, and maybe the bottom 2 or 3 panels catch about half an hour worth of sun at the end of the day. But as I know for sure, the roof catches sunlight in the summer months. So as the sun gets higher in the sky, I'm expecting those panels to start generating more and more power. One other thing to add from Enphase is that they say that 23% of all of the power we consumed in the month of January was provided by solar. So as I said before, there's definitely a few days where 55-60% of our power is being produced by solar at the end of the day, but across the entire month, only 23% came from solar. But as I said, I'm looking forward to that being better as we move into February. Okay, so that's all I've got to say on the 2022 performance. So I would definitely say, it's a month where we've produced the most amount of power so far compared to the other 2 months, and we're certainly approaching a point where nearly all of our power is being generated by solar. I've got a couple of other slides to show you which have some analytics on there, and I made these just to kind of show you the amount of power and savings we're making across the lifetime of having this solar system on there. And because we've got the EV car now, some of you may or may not choose to have a car, or you want to kind of understand how this works and what the benefits are of just having a solar system without the car in the middle. So I've tried to break out the numbers for you, and let me explain what they are. So this is I showed you a version of this chart in one of my earlier videos before we got the system installed, and it kind of showed you what our electricity consumption was before having the solar array installed and before getting an electric vehicle. So I've improved it a little bit, and let me explain what you see. So first of all, looking at the graph, we switched provider and moved to British Gas in August 2020. So that's when data began, and August 2020 was a partial month. That's why it looks significantly different. If you look across the remaining months, you can see what our consumption is. And the backstory here is our house had 2 separate incoming supplies from the grid. So the blue coloured bars represent the main supply to the main portion of our house, and the red coloured segments represent the secondary supply going to a separate kind of portion of our house. So you can see our total consumption there in kind of autumn is 580, 600, 620, that kind of kilowatts every month. In the middle of winter, December and January, we peak at 680, 716 kilowatts a month. And then moving into the summer of 21, we seem to be averaging approximately 500 kilowatts a month. Now, in October 2021, we combined the electricity supplies into one. So we killed off the secondary supply, and we changed it around so that the main supply feeds both portions of our property. So the work was done partway through the month. This is why you see a significantly smaller red segment in October 21, and you see that the blue segment has grown. For those of you who are good at analytics, you might notice that the difference doesn't make sense. We've overall consumed a lot more power, which is true. All I can put it down to is that it's kind of got into the winter months, and we're turning the lights on more. We've got heaters on, the boiler's running more, things like that, and that's why we've consumed significantly more power. There's nothing else of significance which happened in that month besides combining the power supplies. Okay, so looking at November, December and January, we now only have one power supply. So you basically get the blue segment, which is the power that's being consumed by kind of both portions of our house from the grid. Instead, what I've done is put a green segment on there, which represents the amount of solar power that we produced and consumed. So in the month of November 21, we bought 554 kilowatts from the grid. We produced 106 kilowatts from the solar array, giving us a total consumption of 660 kilowatts that month. In December, we pulled 526 kilowatts from the grid. We produced just 81 kilowatts from the solar array, making our consumption a total of 607. Looking at January 22, we purchased 464 kilowatts from the grid. The solar array produced 155 kilowatts. But we also now have the electric car. So I've tried to separate this bit out for you. So using the app provided by Hypervolt, it measures how many kilowatts I'm putting into the car. And so it said I've put in 43 kilowatts into the car. So I've broken that out. So what I'm telling you here is 43 kilowatts of energy went into the car, whether we purchased it from the grid or produced it from the solar array. But if you discount the car, then our house consumed 464 and our solar array produced 155. So that is comparable to the prior 2 months. And the 43 kilowatts is additional electricity consumption that we never had before, because we're charging an electric car instead of purchasing fuel from a petrol station. Okay, so I hope that helps you to understand, for those of you who are interested in the impact of the solar array and the impact of charging the car, which is not going to be consistent, then this will help to break it out. And as we go forward in the future months, if I need to refine this chart, then I will. To explain the boxes at the top then, so since the day we turned on the solar array, which was 9th of November 21, it has produced 342 kilowatts in its lifetime. So that's the sum of the 3 green segments on the November, December, January bars. In 2022, we have produced 155 kilowatts. So this box will represent the cumulative total for this year. So of course it's the same as January at the moment. When I finally get all the paperwork and everything sorted with our energy provider, whatever is being sent back to the grid will pay us a tiny amount of money. And so the grey box here, which is currently blank, will show you how many kilowatts we pushed back to the grid. And then finally, the pink box on the top right represents the amount of kilowatts going into the car. So this will be a running total for the year as well. All right, but hopefully that is a very simple breakdown for you of where the kilowatts are coming and going in our property. So you can relate this to your own project and get an idea of what's going on. Now, on the next page, I have a more complicated graph, but it looks a bit ridiculous at the moment, and let me explain why. So what this is going to be is a payback graph showing you our progress on saving money through solar power and how long that's going to take to pay back the capital that we invested to get the system installed. So the graph is pretty useless at the moment because we've spent 17.5 grand getting the whole system installed, including the EV chargers, and the amount of money that we've recovered so far is so small that the line at the bottom of the graph just looks like it's flatlining. Okay, but what you'll see in the coming months is the lines at the bottom are trying to catch up the gold and yellow line at the top, and when they meet, we've broken even. Okay, so let me explain the numbers that you're going to see here. So first of all, the capex. So this is our capital expenditure. This is the cost of the groundwork that we did in preparation, the electrician who combined our supplies, the cost of getting the entire solar system installed, the inverters, the panels, etc. And it includes the cost of getting the EV chargers installed. A single pod point charger would have been free, but I didn't go with it. Instead, I went with Hypervolt and I paid for it. I got a very good price for it, but nevertheless, I paid for it. So our total capital expenditure is 17,423. I don't expect this to be the final number. I expect that something in the system is probably going to fail in the lifetime, and before I break even, I'll have to replace something. So I imagine that number is going to grow a little bit. Okay, looking at the solar savings. So the 154.7 kilowatts that we generated in the month of January, if I multiply that by my unit rate, which is 20.871 pence, that means I saved £32.29 by not purchasing those kilowatts from the grid. Okay, so that is the blue box that you see at the top. And on the graph, believe it or not, there is a blue line which represents the £71.32. Across the lifetime, so including November and December, we've saved £71.32 by generating power from our solar array versus buying it from the grid. So I'm just adding the 3 months together to get the 71.32. Now, to try and break out what's going on with the fuel consumption for our electric car. So it's a crazy calculation, and I'll touch on it. But basically, we did about 130 miles in the electric car in the month of January. Our old car averaged about 28 miles per gallon. It was a big SUV, it's a diesel, so and we're in London, so the economy is not very good. But I'm going to use 28 miles per gallon as the benchmark for all the calculations in relation to fuel going forward. So that means we would have spent £31.15 purchasing diesel if we still had that car. The 43 kilowatts I mentioned on the previous page have cost us £8.91. So that's to charge the car. So that means net in the month of January, we have saved £22.24. Okay, so that is so basically I calculate the fuel saving on diesel, I subtract the cost of the electricity I purchased to charge the car, and then I get the net fuel saving in the month of January, £22.24. Okay, and again, that line is plotted on the graph, it's just that it's buried right at the very bottom. Now, if I add up all the numbers together, so if I add up the savings from solar and I add up the savings from fuel, the grand total is £93.56. Okay, so my OPEX savings, so these are operating expenses, which is basically buying and selling energy. I've saved £93.56 in the roughly 3 months that we've had the solar installation. Now, you might think, well, this is pretty rubbish. It's going to take forever to pay off the system. And that's true. The thing I would remind you of is that, one, we're in England, so it's not going to be as good as you might see from other people who are based in like Australia or the US, where they just get a lot more sunshine and maybe things are cheaper there. But also, we're in the winter months here and the sun is very low in the sky. So I think we're going to see some dramatic improvements as we progress into the summer. So again, explaining the numbers that you see at the very top, if we look at the balance box, the 17,423 capex, if I subtract the OPEX savings, the £93.56, that leaves a balance of £1,700, £329.44 yet to save to break even. The £93 OPEX saving is the equivalent of just over 0.5%. Right, so £93 is just over 0.5% of 17,423. So that's how much of the system we have paid back so far. Then I've got a couple of statistics for you. So I've got a calculation which tells you how long I've had the system. So on the day I took this screenshot, which was 2 or 3 days ago, we had the system installed for 2 months and 24 days. And based on a linear kind of plot, it will take a further 43 years and 4 months and 2 days to pay back the system. Now, I stress this is a linear calculation. I haven't made any adjustments for seasonality or anything like that. So to get a more accurate reflection, we're going to have to let 12 months go by, and then we'll get a better projection. I did play around with my spreadsheet behind this just to experiment, and I can see that the calculation is working pretty well. Once we start making some more dramatic savings in the summer months, it lops many years off in one go from that forecasted payback. But anyway, I've put this up here on the chart so you can see the progress over time. Based on my calculations prior to installing solar, my forecast was that payoff would be between 8 and 11 years, something like that. And that is based on having an electric car in the equation as well. It's not just on powering the house, but it's also the electric car. You'll have to watch an earlier video. I think it was about 16 years payback if you don't include the electric car, something along those lines. All right, to explain how I have done a few of these calculations in relation to the car. So, like I said, our old car did 28 miles per gallon, and these are UK gallons, not US gallons for any of our international viewers. And if we did 128 miles in the new electric car, I simply did 128 divided by 28 miles per gallon. So that tells me how many gallons of fuel I would have used if I had that car. I then multiply that number by 4.54 to convert gallons or UK gallons into litres. And that arrived at about 20 litres. And then I multiply that by the cost of a litre of diesel. And the way I'm calculating a cost of a litre of diesel is not very scientific. Just as I drive around during the month, I pay attention to what the price is at the petrol stations in my area. And when I come to do the calculations, I just put the average of what I've seen in. There's no science behind it. It's just my opinion based on all the different petrol stations I happen to pass, or when I go and fill up fuel in a different car which uses diesel, how much I pay. So for the month of January, in my neighbourhood, the average price for diesel was £1.49 0.9 pence per litre. Okay, so that number multiplied by 20 whatever litres arrived at £31.15. So that's how I've done my calculation there. Now, in terms of the electric car, a really good electric car can do 4 miles per kilowatt. Okay, so like a combustion engine car, you measure your fuel economy in miles per gallon. With an electric car, you measure it in miles per kilowatt. So a really good car will do 4 miles per kilowatt. A really bad electric car will do 2 miles per kilowatt. Now, of course, this all depends on your driving style. And, if you're on a country road and not braking much, you'll get much better economy. If you're doing stop-start, it might not be that good. So the other thing I'm going to do is at the end of every month, I'm going to look on the car's computer and note down the kind of average for the month in terms of its economy, and then reset it for the following month. So for the month of January, with the 128 miles that we did, the majority of which was on the motorway, the car averaged about 3 miles per kilowatt. So what that tells us is that we're in the middle and we've got some work to do to improve our driving style. The other thing is we haven't really done much mileage on the car to give it a long enough run to settle in and bed down and get used to it, etc., etc. All right, but that's basically what I've got to say about all the kind of savings and the charts and etc., etc. So it's a really good month. It's a really exciting month. So I'm interested to use the Hypervolt chargers some more and kind of get a look and feel for how it is. Again, we're excited to have the new Audi and save a load of money there. The sun is shining a lot more now, so I'm very eager to see just how much extra the system can produce for us. There is a dark cloud, however. So 2 days ago, the UK government and the energy regulator in the UK announced that it is increasing the price cap. So what this means is for those people who are not on a fixed contract for their energy with fixed prices, it means that they're on the variable tariff and your energy provider can change the price whenever they feel like it. What the regulators did in the UK is put a maximum price that they can charge you for a unit of electricity or a unit of gas. And they review this maximum a couple of times a year. Due to the astronomical prices of gas, mainly over the winter months at the moment, at the end of 21 and beginning of 2022, they have increased the cap by 54%. So we are currently on a variable tariff from British Gas, and we tried to get onto a fixed tariff. We were trying to get onto Octopus, but Octopus kind of stopped taking on any new customers just a few days before we kind of got around to trying to get everything set up. So we can't switch provider. Most of the providers are not accepting new customers at the moment, so we're stuck. And if we do find someone, their prices are astronomical. It's actually cheaper for us to be stuck on the variable tariff maxed out at the existing price cap. So if you remember from the earlier slide, we paid 20.871 pence per unit of electricity, so per kilowatt hour that we purchase from the grid. And the regulator has allowed all the providers to increase this by 54% effective April 1st. So I don't know what that means in terms of the actual unit price. I'm waiting to receive the details from our provider and the way they calculate this. But the bottom line is energy is going to cost significantly more. So what does that mean for us? Well, it kind of means that one of the reasons why I got solar has the objective has been met, because I've projected that the cost of energy will continue to go up and become more expensive over time. So for however many months we are stuck on this variable tariff maxed out at the new price cap, for every unit that we manage to generate from the sun, we are saving ourselves an awful lot of money. And that will last until either I can get onto Octopus or switch provider or do something else. So that's a kind of justification for getting solar and kind of my foresight last summer. There's one thing there which has paid off. It also means on that graph that I showed you, you'll start to see that the money that we're saving, grows even more exponentially. It's going to become a bit more exponential from what you see just because it's sunnier as we get into the summer, but also with the cost of energy being even more, the saving that we've made is even more dramatic. So we should see some kind of good benefit capture across the next few months, especially while we're trapped on these energy rates. But okay, that's all of my updates for the month of January. I hope you found it interesting. If you've got any questions or if there's anything you'd like me to dig into a bit more, then don't hesitate to put a comment there, and I will endeavour to do that in the next video.